Using intervals is a helpful method to add new flavors to your soloing. They also really help putting you in the right mindset when you're coming up with ideas for your solos. It's a way that you can think more in terms of melody and not just playing scales. So in this lesson, we're going to get up close and personal with the most commonly used intervals in soloing, and you're going to finally learn how to make use of notes to come up with creative sounds as opposed to thinking in terms of mechanical scale playing. Okay, first off, so what are intervals? Intervals literally means the distance between notes. And in order to understand intervals, we are going to need a scale as our ultimate reference point. And that's going to be the major scale. So if we're in the key of A, we're going to take a look at the A major scale just to lay out the red carpet, essentially, for these intervals so we can get familiar with them one by one. So the major scale is made up of 7 notes. If you remember do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, right? So we start with our root note, our second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh. Then, of course, we can resolve on the octave. So that's the A major scale. That's the do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do in A major. So 7th fret on D, 4th, 6th, 7th fret on G. Then we have 5th and 7th fret on B. And then 4th fret on high E. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. So notice how each of those notes had a number. 1st, 2nd, 3rd, the 4th, the 5th, right? 6th, 7th, and the major lift. Anyway, that's all reference to the intervals, right? So the distance of space between the notes is signified by those numbers. So for example, you were to be like, hey, Eddie, play me an A note and then play a 5th on top of it. I would be like, okay, and it would look like this. Because I have an A note, right? The 1st, and then the 5th right here. From 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I play them together. So that's a 5th interval. But understanding the assigned numbers is just the beginning. We're going to take a look at how we can really identify the sound, the color, the flavor that each of these intervals give us. And the best way to do that is to observe how the intervals work in relation to the root note. We obviously need a reference point, right? So that reference point, that anchor, would be our root note, the 1st, or A. So if we wanted to take a look at the 2nd, right, which is right after, right here, we wanted to know how does that work with the root note? Well, we have to play them in relation to each other. You don't necessarily have to play them one after the other. You can play them at the same time. Very, very tense right there, but kind of cool. I can see how that would work. But we have... That's kind of our little introduction to how the note actually sounds in relation to the root. It sounds like it wants to go somewhere, right? There's certain notes I like to call bridge notes, or like a passing note. It's like a note that you don't want to stay on too long because it doesn't really feel resolute when you hang on it too long, but it wants to lead to something else. It wants to resolve to a different note. So you could resolve back to the root, like that could work, or we can try going up the scale, going, that works. So we went from the root to the 2nd to the 3rd. And we're playing right here a major 3rd, which I'll explain why it's called the major 3rd in a little bit. But remember, we're referencing the A major scale as our introduction to these intervals. So we have our major 3rd as part of the major scale. And when we play them together with the root note, you can kind of hear some harmony happening, right? A particular type of harmony that we're more used to hearing, you know? When we play here on the 2nd, it sounds a little suspended, right? It like wants to resolve, in this case, up to the 3rd. So the 3rd is already more resolute sounding and more satisfying, right, on bringing it home than the 2nd. So let's keep it moving. We got the 4th, right, which is right on top of the, as far as, where it's positioned on the fretboard, right? It's on the 7th fret there, from the D string to the G string. We have our root and 4th. And that sounds nice, but I feel like that also kind of wants to go somewhere, right? So if I were to just drone out an A note and then go, there's also some suspension happening there, right? Suspension tension. So we want to resolve that to something else. Let's try resolving to the 3rd. starting to sound pretty good, right? So right now, this is good intel, right? We're figuring out that each of these intervals has a certain sound, has a certain vibe. They're not all necessarily equal in the sense that, I mean, they all are equal in their importance, I would say, but they're not all equal in how they sound and kind of what they make our ears do, right? So generally, so far, right, from these 4 notes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 2 of them have the most resolute sound. So let's keep it moving. We got the 5th, right? 5th fret on the B string there. So this is what I think of with the 5th. I think, if you're in medieval times and they're about to announce an archery competition, like if you think about like the old Robin Hood movies or something, right? It would be like, you hear that like horn that was like 20 feet long. So it's got that kind of like, I don't know, that announcement sort of sound to me, which is kind of cool. That actually has a little bit of a, there's tension there for sure. It's not super resolute, not nearly as much as like the 3rd, but it does sound pretty nice. It's got a sound to it, right? So if we were to just kind of go through what we've already covered, right? So we have root, and then let's say we do 5th. Let's try the 3rd now. That sounds nice. We're actually implying a chord by doing that. By playing the root, 5th, and 3rd, or the root, 3rd, 5th, right? That actually makes up an A major triad. So we're implying a chord by just playing those notes. So if I drone out an open A string, right? You can hear the sort of music working, right? Like there's sparks of music happening because it's stimulating, at least to my ears, right? It sounds like some music's about to happen, right? This isn't just musical information in terms of walking through a scale. There's actually some movement. There's some melody there. And then if we went, you can create all kinds of pretty melodies. And we haven't even like tried, playing this in actual context, right? It's just us and our guitars figuring this stuff out. So you can see what I'm talking about with the, referencing it with the root note, how important that is, because that's really going to tell us what kind of tension, what kind of sound we can get. So let's keep it moving. We got the 6th. That sounds really nice. That's kind of suspendy, and it kind of makes me want to go down to the 5th after that. And something as simple as that totally counts as a melody. You can consider that melodic playing. So when you're practicing this, right, you find yourself coming up with real simple but very melodic ideas. Doesn't matter how simple they are. What you're doing is when you're thinking in terms of intervals, you're thinking in terms of the sound, which is putting you in much more control over what you're doing. So when you get to know each of these sounds, you're going to be able to like actually, in a way, manipulate your listeners, right? Even if it's yourself, to actually hearing some music, right? So that's what's happening here. So at this point, why don't we make like House of Pain and jump around? Let's just hop between intervals. So instead of moving in like a specific order, like a linear order, we can do something like this. Like I'll do root, 6th, 2nd, 5th, 3rd. Let's try that. Root, 6th, 2nd, 5th, 3rd. It sounds pretty. Almost sounds like Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Although, what was that melody? Yeah. That was 2nd, 3rd, root, and then a lower octave root, and then 5th. Now you can speak a universal language across galaxies, right? So, but, literally that was not planned, right? It just kind of came to mind, and then I was thinking, okay, what are the intervals? And then we just figured them out right there. All right, but we can't forget the 7th interval, so we have certainly some tension there. It has like kind of a jazzy sound. Ooh, I like that. Root, 7th, 3rd. Let's try sixth. Ooh. And something about like double picking it just kind of makes sense to me. Second there. Now notice how this is much more, I would say, interesting, right? Much more stimulating to my own ears than just going. Right? It's like we're essentially wandering through these intervals and we're stumbling across really interesting melodies that don't necessarily sound like a scale. They sound like melody. They sound like music. And this is exactly why thinking in terms of intervals will automatically set you up for better, more intentional, more interesting sounding soloing, because you're not going to be caught in the trap of just mechanically playing scales. You're actually going to be thinking in terms of melodies that you're going to be able to come up with because you familiarize yourself with the sounds of each of these intervals. And this is just basing it off of one scale, the major scale. The reason why the major scale is so important is because it's a reference point to almost everything in music, right? Especially when we're talking about chord tones, triads, arpeggios, that kind of stuff, all these very important target notes, right? The major scale is what gives us that. So we use that as our ultimate reference point. But there are certain changes we can make to the notes from the major scale that'll give us a whole new tonality. So let's explore a couple of those. We're going to look particularly at the third and the seventh. And what we're going to do is we're going to flatten the note or make it a minor third and a minor seventh. Remember how I talked about how the third is major because it implies that major chord, especially being part of the major scale, right? So that third is extremely important. It's a very, very resolute interval. And the seventh is the same way. That's a major seventh. So if we were to flatten both of those notes, take a minor third or a minor seventh approach, would sound something like this. So we have root, second, minor third. Already sounds different, right? Fourth, fifth, sixth, and then minor seventh. So instead of here, flattening it over here, just to keep it in the relative neighborhood, right? That same note is right here. So we move the third to right here. The minor third is on the fifth fret of the G string, and the minor seventh is on the eighth fret of the B string. So now if we were to just wander through, let's do 1, minor 7, third, second. Let's try that. Cool. It's kind of a jazz fusion-y sound. Or like something I'd hear a saxophone play. Very cool. Very melodic, right? But a whole different tonality. If we were to do the same thing but played root and then major 7, major third, second, it'd sound like this. Oh, this is really fun. Compared to... Ooh. And I highly advise wandering through these intervals, right? Just pick kind of random assortments of them instead of just going in a linear up and down kind of thing, right? Because you don't want to get caught in that mechanical scale playing trap, right? The same thing, you can find that temptation here too. So you really want to make sure that when you're playing, just give yourself a handful of numbers, handful of intervals, and then play them out and see how they sound. Oh, and by the way, if you're getting value out of this lesson, do me a favor, hit that like button and consider subscribing to our YouTube channel. It'll really help us out and it'll keep you in the front seat for all of the brand new lessons we got coming your way. So thanks a lot and let's get right back to it. So now that we know these intervals, let's put them to the test. I wanted it to be as neutral sounding as possible to leave room for all of these colorful intervals. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to wander through, mess around with even combining the major and minor intervals, seeing what kind of interesting sounds we can get. All right, here we go. Already first melody, right? Root, second, third. Or first, second, third, right? Let's do fifth, fourth. And then fifth, third. There you go. Let's throw in the seventh. All right, let's mess around with some of these minor ones. So it's minor third, minor seventh, we can make that a minor sixth, right? We can go and down on the fifth there, right? Now, something like that minor sixth has a very distinct sound. So just cycling through those intervals and even experimenting with playing the major and minor ones kind of next to each other, I mean, it still totally worked. In fact, you could do something like this if you wanted to get even like semi-chromatic, you know, if you're going, because you're going major 7, minor 7, 6th, and you can even go minor 6, which by the way, that's on the 6th fret of the B string, and then resolve it down to the 5th, right? I mean, that works, right? And if we wanted to mess around just going back and forth between the major and minor third, we can go something like this. So it's still relevant, it's still valid musically. It's just really interesting, and it gives you an opportunity to just play with these different sounds and just try something new, right? So you're getting these really fascinating tonalities that clash, but in a way that's cool and doesn't sound wrong necessarily, at least not to my ears. They sound like, you know, there's definitely some tension there, but the more comfortable you get with creating tension and of course releasing that tension, the better creative calls you're going to be making when you're composing your melodies. So now that you know these intervals, what I want you to do is, if you have a looper pedal, just create a really simple loop with one chord, or just get on YouTube and then just look up a backing track that's just focusing on one chord. You can stick with the A chord since that's what we focused on, right? And then just sit there and experiment, like work with that tension, just mess around with those different intervals. You might find that certain ones sound better to your ears than others, and you might spend more time with them. That's totally okay, right? You got to familiarize yourself with them. That's the most important. So that way, when you start coming up with melodies, you'll have much more of a familiarity of like the musical flow of things. And it really comes down to understanding those intervals and how they react to the sound of the root note. But this is something that can work in any musical key, not just the key of A. And if you want to be able to quickly and easily find every key on your fretboard and learn how to solo in all those keys, then I happen to have just the thing that's going to get you there. This right here is a guide on how to instantly solo in any key. I mean any key. You're going to learn in record time how to find any key on your fretboard and be able to solo in it. So imagine being able to take what you've learned today and apply it to all the keys. Well, that's what's going to happen when you take this lesson, which, by the way, is 100% free. Just be sure to click right over here to claim your copy, or check the link in the description box. I really do think the difference between playing music and playing scales really comes down to intent. And the best way to build that intent is exactly what we went over today, because they're the very building blocks to making you a creative musical guitar player.